The stars had been at war for 40 years, and Sergeant Elias Vance had stopped counting the bodies long ago. He sat in the cargo bay of the assault carrier Resolute Dawn, checking his medical kit for the 100th time that day. The simple act of organizing bandages and syringes kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. Around him, soldiers from a dozen worlds prepared for the mission ahead. Some prayed to gods Elias had never heard of, while others sharpened weapons or wrote final messages to loved ones they might never see again. The war between the Galactic Coalition and the Vrakari Dominion had consumed everything. Entire planets had burned, and billions had died on both sides. The Vrakari were reptilian creatures, covered in thick scales that shimmered like oil in sunlight. They stood taller than humans, with claws that could tear through armor and teeth designed for killing. The Coalition called them monsters, beasts, demons from the dark between stars, and perhaps they were right to do so. Elias pulled a worn photograph from his chest pocket and stared at the face of his daughter Maya. She had been 7 years old when the Vrakari bombed New Geneva, and her smile in the picture was the last piece of her he had left. 3 years had passed since that day, but the pain remained fresh like an open wound that refused to heal. He had every reason to hate the Vrakari with all his heart. He had every reason to want them dead, and yet something inside him refused to surrender to that hatred completely. "Vance, you ready?" called Corporal Yenis, a Telkari soldier with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient sadness. Her species was known throughout the galaxy for their deep empathy, and she had become something like a friend to Elias during their months of service together. "Ready as I will ever be," he replied, tucking the photograph away carefully. The mission briefing had been simple and brutal. Operation Scorched Cradle would send Coalition forces to invade Varik Prime, a fortress world at the heart of Vrakari territory. Intelligence suggested the planet housed a critical military command center, and destroying it could cripple the enemy's ability to wage war. Victory here might mean an end to decades of bloodshed, or it might mean more graves than anyone could count. Lieutenant Hargrove marched through the cargo bay, his boots striking the metal floor with sharp purpose. He was a tall man with gray eyes that had grown cold from too many battles and too much loss. His younger brother had died fighting the Vrakari 5 years ago, and since then Hargrove had become a machine built only for vengeance. "Listen up," Hargrove announced, his voice cutting through the noise of preparation. "We drop in 6 hours. Our target is the northern sector of the capital city. We secure the area, eliminate all hostile forces, and hold position until reinforcements arrive. There will be no retreat and no surrender. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." The soldiers responded in unison. Elias said nothing. He simply nodded and continued his work. The drop came faster than expected, and suddenly Elias found himself falling through burning atmosphere in a metal pod designed to deliver soldiers into hell. The planet below was beautiful in a terrible way, with red deserts and black mountains and cities that glittered like jewels scattered across the landscape. But beauty meant nothing in war. Beauty was just another thing that would be destroyed. They landed hard, and the fighting began immediately. Vrakari warriors poured from the ruined buildings, their scales gleaming under the alien sun as they charged with weapons blazing and jaws open in terrible war cries. Elias had seen them fight before, but their ferocity still shocked him every time. They feared nothing, not even death. They would keep attacking until their hearts stopped beating. The battle lasted 3 days and 3 nights. Without pause, Elias moved through the chaos like a ghost, dragging wounded soldiers to safety and patching their broken bodies as best he could. He saved 17 lives on the first day alone, pulling them back from the edge of death with steady hands and whispered words of comfort. But he also watched many die. He held them as the light faded from their eyes, and he promised to remember their names. By the 3rd day, the northern sector was secured. though the word secured felt like a cruel joke. The buildings were rubble, the streets were rivers of blood and ash, and the silence that followed the fighting was somehow worse than the noise of battle. Elias sat against a broken wall and tried to remember what peace felt like. He could not recall. Sergeant Vance. Hargrove's voice crackled through the communication device. New orders from command. There is a bunker complex beneath the government citadel. Intelligence suggests high-value military targets are hiding inside. Your squad will sweep the tunnels and eliminate any resistance. No survivors. No exceptions. Acknowledge. Elias felt something cold settle in his stomach. Acknowledge, Lieutenant. He gathered his squad. 8 soldiers from 3 different worlds, and they made their way toward the citadel through streets littered with the dead. Corporal Yennis walked beside him, her large eyes scanning the shadows for danger. Private Okonkwo, a young man from Earth who had joined the military to escape poverty, gripped his rifle with trembling hands. The others followed in grim silence. The entrance to the bunker was hidden beneath collapsed stone, but Coalition scanners had found it easily. Elias stared into the darkness below and felt a strange sensation, like standing at the edge of something that would change everything. Life signs detected, Yennis reported, studying her scanner with focused attention. Dozens of them, deep underground. They are clustered in a single chamber. Could be enemy command, Hargrove said through the communication device. Could be their last stand. Proceed with extreme caution and eliminate all targets. Elias took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness. The tunnels wound downward like the throat of some great beast. Ancient stone walls pressing close on all sides. Their helmet lights cut through dust that had not been disturbed for centuries. And the air grew thick and stale the deeper they descended. Whatever waited at the bottom had been hidden here for a reason, and Elias Vance was about to discover what that reason was. The squad moved through the tunnels like shadows, their weapons raised and their hearts beating fast with anticipation of combat. Every corner could hide an enemy. Every shadow could contain death. And the soldiers knew that one moment of hesitation could cost them their lives. Elias stayed in the middle of the formation, his medical kit ready for whatever wounds the darkness might bring. The walls around them were covered in strange carvings. Images of Rakari history, etched into stone by hands that had turned to dust long ago. Elias saw pictures of great battles and ancient heroes, of ceremonies and celebrations that meant nothing to him, but clearly held deep meaning for the enemy. He realized with sudden clarity that the Vakari had existed for thousands of years before humanity ever reached the stars. They had built civilizations and created art and loved their children just as humans did. But such thoughts were dangerous in war, and he pushed them aside. Contact ahead, Yennis whispered, her scanner glowing softly in the dark. The life signs are just beyond that door. One count 37 smaller readings and 5 larger ones. They are not moving. Lieutenant Hargrove's voice came through the communication device, eager and hungry. Perfect. Breach and clear. Weapons free on all targets. This ends now. Private Okonkwo moved to the front of the formation, explosive charges in his shaking hands. He was so young, barely 20 years old, and Elias could see the fear in his eyes mixing with something that might have been doubt. But orders were orders, and soldiers followed orders. The charges were set, and the squad took position. Breach in 3. The point man counted. 2, 1. The door exploded inward with a thunder of fire and metal, and the soldiers rushed through the smoke with weapons raised and fingers on triggers, ready to kill whatever waited inside. Elias followed close behind, his hand on his sidearm, his body tense for combat, and then they all stopped. The chamber before them was not a military command center. There were no weapons, no soldiers, no war machines waiting to destroy them. Instead, They found themselves staring at something none of them had expected to see. Nursery 37 Rakari cubs huddled together in the center of the room. Their small bodies pressed close for comfort and protection. Their scales were soft and pale, not yet hardened by age. And their eyes were huge with terror as they stared at the armed soldiers who had just exploded through their door. Some of them were barely old enough to walk, crawling on tiny clawed hands. Others were children, perhaps 5 or 6 years old in human terms, clutching at each other and making sounds of pure fear. Among them crouched 5 elderly Rakari, their scales faded and gray with age. They were caretakers, Elias realized, too old and frail to fight in any war. They positioned their ancient bodies between the soldiers and the young, spreading their arms wide in desperate protection. And they hissed not with aggression, but with pleading. They were begging for the lives of the children. Hostiles confirmed. Hargrove's voice crackled through the communication device. Cold and without hesitation. Weapons free. Eliminate all targets. The squad raised their rifles. Elias heard the click of safeties being released. The hum of weapons powering up for the kill. In seconds, 37 children would die, their blood spilling across the ancient stone floor. And something inside Elias Vance broke, or perhaps something inside him finally healed. He stepped forward, placing his body directly between his squad and the cubs. His arms spread wide just as the elderly caretakers had done. His rifle hung at his side, untouched, and his eyes met the eyes of his fellow soldiers with absolute certainty. "Stand down," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his heart. "Lower your weapons." Now, Corporal Yenis stared at him with shock. Private Okonkwo's mouth fell open. The other soldiers froze in confusion, uncertain what to do when one of their own had become an obstacle. "Sergeant Vance, what are you doing?" Hargrove demanded through the communication device. "Move aside." "That is a direct order." "No, sir," Elias replied, and the words felt like freedom. "I will not move. These are not soldiers. They are children. I will not fire on children, and I will not allow anyone else to do so. They are the enemy." Hargrove shouted, his voice rising with fury. "They are Rakari. Their kind killed millions of our people. They would not hesitate to kill our children if the positions were reversed." Elias thought of Maya, her small hand holding his as they walked through the gardens of New Geneva. He thought of her laughter, her questions about the stars, her dreams of becoming a pilot someday. The Rakari had taken all of that from him. They had burned his daughter to ash along with everything he loved. And yet, if we do this, Elias said quietly, we become exactly what we say we are fighting against. We become monsters. And I refuse to be a monster, sir. I refuse to let my hatred make me into something Maya would not recognize. Silence filled the chamber. Heavy and thick as the ancient stone around them, one of the elderly caretakers, a female with faded blue scales and eyes clouded with age, watched this strange scene with growing wonder. Her name was Theska, though Elias did not know this yet. She had lived for 60 years and had seen terrible things, done by both sides of this endless war. She had watched coalition soldiers execute wounded prisoners. She had watched her own kind do the same and worse, but never, in all her long years, had she seen an enemy choose mercy. She did not understand the human's words, for she did not speak his language, but she understood his actions perfectly. He was willing to die for her children, these cubs he had never met, these small lives that meant nothing to his people. Why would he do such a thing? The question burned in her mind like a new star being born. Corporal Yenis lowered her weapon first, her Telkari instincts refusing to allow her to harm innocent young. Private Okonkwo followed a moment later, his face pale with relief. One by one, others in the squad made their choice, until only 2 soldiers remained with rifles raised. The standoff stretched on for an eternity, compressed into seconds. Finally, Hargrove's voice returned, bitter and full of barely controlled rage. "Fine. We withdraw and report to command. Let them decide what to do with this mess. But know this, Sergeant Vance, this is not over. You have made a choice today that you will regret." Elias did not respond. He simply stood his ground and watched as his squad slowly retreated toward the tunnel entrance. Before leaving, he turned back one final time and met the gaze of the old caretaker, Theska. She placed a clawed hand over her chest in a gesture he did not understand, but somehow he felt its meaning in his bones. The squad extracted from the bunker and returned to the surface, leaving the nursery untouched and its inhabitants alive. Elias walked in silence, knowing that everything had changed and nothing would ever be the same. Above ground, Lieutenant Hargrove was waiting with armed military police. "Sergeant Elias Vance," he announced with grim satisfaction. "You are under arrest for insubordination and disobeying a direct order in combat. Your actions have endangered this unit and potentially compromised the entire mission. You will be transported to the Resolute Dawn for immediate tribunal." Elias held out his wrists for the restraints. "I understand, sir." As they led him away, he looked up at the alien sky and wondered if he had just saved lives or thrown away his own, perhaps both. The military prison aboard the Resolute Dawn was cold and gray, a small metal room designed to break the spirit of anyone trapped within its walls. Elias sat on the hard bench and stared at the ceiling, counting the rivets and bolts that held the ship together. He'd been here for 3 days, waiting for his tribunal, waiting to learn if he would live or die. The charges against him were serious. Insubordination, disobeying a direct order in combat, endangering fellow soldiers, and potential treason. Any one of these charges could result in execution. Together, they formed a death sentence wrapped in military procedure, but Elias felt no regret every time he closed his eyes. He saw the faces of those Vakari cubs, their terror transforming into confusion and then into something like hope. When they realized they would not die that day, he saw the elderly caretakers, their ancient bodies willing to sacrifice themselves for the young. He saw mercy where everyone expected only violence. That vision was worth more than his life. The door to his cell opened, and Corporal Yennis stepped inside, her pale blue face marked with worry. "Elias, I only have a few minutes. The guards owed me a favor." "You should not be here," Elias said, standing to face her. "If they catch you visiting a traitor, you could face charges yourself." "You are not a traitor," Yennis replied firmly. "You are the only person in that bunker who remembered what we are supposed to be fighting for. I have been thinking about what you said, about becoming monsters, and I cannot stop thinking about it." Elias smiled sadly. "It does not matter what I said. Hargrove wants my head, and command will give it to him. The war has made everyone hungry for blood, and questioning that hunger is the greatest crime of all. Perhaps," Yennis admitted, "but something is happening that you should know about. Something unexpected." Before she could explain, alarms began screaming throughout the ship, red lights flashing in urgent warning. Yennis's eyes widened with surprise. "That is the communication alert. Something major is coming through." Guards rushed to the cell and pulled Yennis away, but not before she called back to Elias with strange excitement in her voice. "Whatever happens, know that you did the right thing." The cell door slammed shut, and Elias was alone again with the alarms. Hours passed before anyone came to explain what had happened. When the door finally opened, it was not guards who entered, but Admiral Chun herself, the highest-ranking human officer in the entire coalition fleet. She was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen more death than anyone should witness in 100 lifetimes. Her presence in this tiny cell meant something extraordinary had occurred. "Sergeant Vance," she said, studying him with an expression he could not read. "Do you know why I am here?" "No, Admiral," Elias replied honestly. "I assumed you were here to confirm my execution." Admiral Chun almost smiled. 3 hours ago, we intercepted a Vakari transmission. It was not military encryption. It was broadcast on open frequencies across their entire territory. Every Vakari world, every ship, every station received this message. She held up a data pad and pressed a button. The screen flickered to life, showing footage that made Elias's heart stop. It was the bunker. It was him. The video showed Elias stepping between the rifles and the children, his arms spread wide in protection. It showed him refusing to move, refusing to fire, refusing to become a monster. The footage was shaky and crude, clearly recorded on primitive equipment. But every moment was captured with painful clarity. "The elderly caretaker filmed this," Admiral Chun explained. "Her name is Theska, and she apparently managed to transmit it before we could block Vakari communications. Every citizen of the Dominion has seen a human soldier stand against his own people to protect Vakari children." Elias could not speak. He could only stare at the screen and wonder. "For 40 years, the Admiral continued, the Vakari have been told that humans are monsters. They have been taught that we would exterminate their entire species if given the chance. This belief has fueled their resistance and made peace impossible. But now they have seen something that contradicts everything they believed. What does this mean?" Elias finally managed to ask. Admiral Chun took a deep breath. 6 hours ago, the Vakari High Command sent a message to Coalition leadership. They are requesting a ceasefire. The words hit Elias like a physical blow. A ceasefire? After 40 years? "They have one condition," the Admiral said, her eyes locked on his. "They will only negotiate if you are present at the talks. The human from the footage. The one who showed mercy. They want to meet you, Sergeant Vance. They want to understand." Elias sat down heavily on the bench, his legs no longer able to support him. This was impossible. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. He had expected death, and instead he was being offered the chance to end the war. "The charges against you have been dropped," Admiral Chun informed him. "Not because everyone agrees with what you did, but because you have become the most valuable diplomatic asset in human history. There are people who think you are a hero, and there are people who think you are a fool. But everyone agrees that you are necessary." "I am just a medic," Elias protested weakly. "I do not know anything about diplomacy or politics or making peace. Neither does anyone else," the Admiral replied with something approaching warmth. "We have been fighting for so long that we have forgotten how to stop. Perhaps that is exactly why you are the right person for this. You remembered something the rest of us forgot." She stood and moved toward the door. "The peace talks will be held at Meridian's Crossing, a neutral station at the edge of Coalition and Dominion space. You will be cleaned, briefed, and transported there within 48 hours. The fate of 2 civilizations may rest on your shoulders, Sergeant. I hope you are ready, and if I am not?" Elias asked. Admiral Chun paused at the threshold. "Then, billions more will die, and this war will continue until one side or the other is completely destroyed." "No pressure." She left, and Elias sat alone in the silence that followed. He pulled the photograph of Maya from his pocket and studied her face for a long moment. She had been dead for 3 years, killed by the very species he was now being asked to make peace with. Part of him still burned with anger and grief and the desire for revenge, but another part of him, the part that had stood in front of those rifles, knew that Maya would not want more children to die in her name. She would want the killing to stop. She would want her father to build something good from the ashes of loss. "I will try," he whispered to her photograph. "I will try to make you proud." The photograph did not answer, but Elias felt for the first time in years that perhaps there was hope after all. 2 days later, He boarded a diplomatic shuttle bound for Meridian's crossing, leaving behind the war he had known and stepping into an uncertain future where anything was possible, including peace. Meridian's crossing hung in the void between stars like a jewel suspended in eternal darkness. The station was ancient, built by a species that had vanished long before humans or Rakari had ever looked up at the night sky. Its halls were neutral ground, a place where enemies could meet without weapons, where words replaced bullets and hope replaced hatred. Elias walked through those halls with a coalition diplomatic team surrounding him, their expensive suits and polished shoes making him feel like a stranger in borrowed clothes. They had given him a formal uniform, cleaned him up, and taught him basic diplomatic phrases, but he still felt like a medic pretending to be something he was not. Remember, Ambassador Reyes whispered as they approached the main conference chamber. "You are not here to negotiate specific terms. That is our job. You are here because they asked for you. Your role is to be human, to show them that what happened in that bunker was not an accident or a trick. And what if it was just me?" Elias asked quietly. "What if I am the only human who would have done that? What if they are expecting something from humanity that does not exist?" Ambassador Reyes had no answer. The chamber doors opened, and Elias saw Rakari for the first time since the bunker. They sat on the opposite side of a long curved table, their scales gleaming under the soft lights, their eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. There were generals in battle armor, politicians in ceremonial robes, and elders whose age showed in every faded scale, and sitting among them, wearing simple gray fabric, was Theska, the old caretaker. Met his gaze across the room, and something passed between them that needed no words. She had recorded the footage that changed everything. She had shown her people that their enemy was not what they believed. The negotiations began, and they were difficult from the very first moment. Rakari General Vrak slammed his clawed fist on the table within minutes. "You expect us to simply forget the worlds you have burned, the millions of our people you have slaughtered? One human's moment of hesitation does not erase 40 years of genocide." Coalition Admiral Chun responded with equal force. "And what of our worlds? What of New Geneva and Prosperity Station and the Theta colonies? Your fleet showed no mercy when you bombed civilian populations into dust." The shouting continued for hours, accusations flying back and forth like weapons, old wounds being torn open and displayed for everyone to see. Elias sat in silence through most of it, watching the hatred flow between the two sides and wondering if peace was truly possible. During a break in the negotiations, Theska approached him through a translator, a small device that converted her hissing Vakari speech into human words. "You are the one from the bunker," she said. "The one who stood between the fire and our young." "Yes," Elias replied simply. "Why?" she asked, and the question held the weight of 40 years. "Why would you risk your life for children of your enemy? We have been told all our lives that humans are monsters who would destroy us completely if they could. Why would a monster show mercy?" Elias thought carefully before answering. "I had a daughter named Maya. She was 7 years old when your ships bombed our colony. She died afraid and alone, and I was not there to protect her." Theska's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. "When I saw your cubs in that bunker," Elias continued, "I saw Maya. I saw children who had done nothing wrong, who deserved a chance to grow up and become whatever they dreamed of becoming. I could not save my daughter, but I could save them. And I realized that killing them would not bring Maya back. It would only add more grief to a universe already drowning in it." The old caretaker was silent for a long moment. "You had every reason to hate us," she finally said. "Every reason to want revenge. I still do," Elias admitted honestly. "Part of me will always be angry. Part of me will always grieve. But I do not want to be controlled by that anger. I do not want to become the thing I hate." Theska placed her clawed hand over her chest, the same gesture she had made in the bunker. Among my people, this means one heart shared. It is what we say when we recognize another being as worthy of respect, regardless of species or conflict. I gave you this gesture in the bunker, even though you did not understand it. I understand it now, Elias said softly. The negotiations resumed, and slowly, painfully, progress began to emerge. General Vrax still raged, and Admiral Chun still pushed for advantage. But Theska spoke during a crucial moment, telling the assembly what she had witnessed in the bunker and what she had learned from speaking with Elias. This human lost his child to our weapons, she declared to the Rakari delegation. And yet he protected our children with his own body. If he can find the strength to show mercy after such loss, then perhaps we must ask ourselves whether we have been fighting the wrong enemy. Perhaps our true enemy is not the humans, but the hatred that has consumed us both. Her words did not end the arguments, but they changed the tone. Slowly, negotiators on both sides began to speak of solutions instead of grievances, a future instead of past. By the end of the first week, a formal ceasefire was signed. It was not peace, not yet, but it was a pause in the killing. By the end of the first month, prisoner exchanges began. Soldiers who had rotted in enemy cells for years were returned to their families, weeping with joy and disbelief. By the end of the first year, trade routes reopened and borders softened. Rakarian humans began to meet as individuals rather than as enemies, but the work was far from finished. There were betrayals and setbacks, moments when everything nearly collapsed back into war. Hardliners on both sides sabotaged negotiations, assassinated diplomats, and tried to reignite the conflict. Each time, Elias was called back to speak, to remind everyone why they had started down this path. He became a symbol, though he never wanted to be one. Humans called him the peacemaker, while Vakari called him the one who stood. Children learned his name in schools, and artists painted his image standing between rifles and cubs. 3 years after the bunker, the final peace treaty was ready for signing. It would officially end 40 years of war and begin a new era of cooperation between species who had once existed only to destroy each other. And Elias Vance, the medic who could not shoot children, was invited to witness the ceremony that would change the galaxy forever. The Treaty of Meridian was signed on a clear morning in the 5th year after the war's end. Though Elias did not attend the ceremony, he watched from his small farmhouse on Earth, sitting in a wooden chair on the porch as the broadcast played on a screen propped against the railing. Leaders from both sides spoke words of hope and healing, promises of cooperation and shared future. And the galaxy celebrated a peace that many had believed impossible. Elias simply watched and thought of all those who had not lived to see this day. He had left public life 2 years earlier, retreating from the cameras and the speeches and the constant attention that had followed him since the bunker. He had never wanted to be famous, had never sought the weight of symbolism that others placed upon him. All he had wanted was to do the right thing in a moment when it mattered. Now he lived quietly, working at a veterans clinic in the nearby town where he helped soldiers from both sides process the trauma of war. They came to him with nightmares and guilt and wounds that medicine could not heal, and he listened to their stories and shared his own. It was good work, important work. The kind of work that Maya would have understood. His farmhouse sat on a hill surrounded by gardens that he had planted himself. Flowers and vegetables growing in soil that had never known war. Sometimes he would spend entire days among the plants, his hands in the dirt, his mind at peace. The garden was his temple, his sanctuary, his proof that life could still grow even after terrible destruction. The broadcast ended, and Elias turned off the screen with a sigh. The treaty was signed, the war was over, and the galaxy would slowly learn to heal. His part in that healing was finished, or so he thought. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, A transport ship descended through the clouds and landed at the edge of his property. Elias watched with curiosity as the engines powered down and the door opened. Theska emerged. Older now, her scales almost entirely silver with age, her movements slow but determined. She carried a small case in her clawed hands, and her clouded eyes found Elias across the distance between them. He stood and walked to meet her, the evening breeze carrying the scent of his garden across the hill. They had not seen each other in over a year, but they had exchanged messages and stories, and had become something like friends despite the gulf between their species. You did not attend the ceremony. Theska observed through her translator. Too many cameras, Elias replied with a small smile. Too many speeches. I said everything I had to say long ago. Theska made a sound that might have been laughter. You have never liked attention. It is one of the things I respect about you. She held out the case. I have brought something from my people. The High Council wished to present it to you at the ceremony, but I convinced them that you would prefer a quieter moment. Elias accepted the case and opened it carefully. Inside, resting on soft fabric, was a crystal unlike anything he had ever seen. It glowed with inner light, swirling colors moving within its depths like captured starlight. And carved into its surface were names written in Vrakari script. These are the names of the 37 cubs you saved, Theska explained. They are grown now. The youngest is 8 years old, and the oldest is nearly an adult. Some have become teachers. Others are healers. One is studying to become a diplomat. And all of them asked to be part of this gift. Elias stared at the crystal, unable to speak. The names blurred as tears formed in his eyes. That one there. Theska pointed to a name near the bottom. Her name is Veka. She is 15 now, and she was one of the smallest cubs in the bunker. She does not remember that night, but she has studied the footage many times. Last year, she wrote a paper for her school about you, about what you did and why it mattered. What did she say? Elias managed to ask. She said that courage is not the absence of fear or hatred, but the choice to act with compassion despite both. She said that one person can change the universe if they are willing to stand alone for what is right. Theska paused. She also said that she wants to meet you someday, to thank you for the life she would not have without your choice. Elias closed the case gently and held it against his chest. I did not do it for thanks, he said quietly. I did not even do it for them. I did it because I could not live with myself if I had done otherwise. I know, Theska replied. That is why it mattered. You asked nothing for what you did. You expected nothing. You simply chose mercy when mercy seemed impossible. She placed her clawed hand over her chest, the gesture that had begun everything. One heart, shared. It means that you and I, human and Vrakari, are connected beyond the boundaries of species or history. What you carry in your soul, I carry in mine. Your grief is my grief. Your hope is my hope. Elias mirrored the gesture, pressing his hand against his own heart. One heart, shared. They stood together in the fading light, two beings from worlds that had tried to destroy each other, finding common ground in a garden on a hill. The war was over, the treaties were signed, but this moment was more important than any ceremony. I should return, Theska finally said. My transport is waiting, and I am old. Long journeys tire me more than they once did. Will I see you again? Elias asked. Theska smiled, an expression that looked strange on her reptilian face, but felt genuinely warm. Perhaps. If not in this life, then in whatever comes after. I believe that souls who share a heart will always find each other again. She turned and walked back toward her transport, her silver scales catching the last rays of sunlight. At the door, she paused and looked back. Thank you, Elias Vance. For my people, for those children, for teaching us that enemies can become friends. The universe is better because you chose mercy. The transport rose into the darkening sky and disappeared among the emerging stars. Elias watched until it was gone, then looked down at the crystal case in his hands. 37 lives, 37 futures that existed because he had refused to fire. He thought of Maya, of her smile and her laughter, and the way she had looked at the stars with wonder. He thought of the night she died, and the grief that had nearly destroyed him. Part of him would always carry that loss, would always feel the empty space where she should have been. But now there were 37 others who lived because of that grief, who grew and learned and loved because one broken man had chosen hope over hatred. Maya would have loved that. Maya would have been proud. Elias went inside and placed the crystal on his windowsill, where it caught the light of the rising moon and glowed with soft colors. Then he made himself dinner and sat at his table alone, as he did every night, thinking of the past and wondering about the future. The war was over. Peace had begun. The hard work of healing would take generations, but it had started with a single act, a single choice. A single man standing between rifles and children, and that was enough. That was everything outside his window. The stars shone down on a galaxy that was slowly learning to live together, where former enemies were becoming allies, and where the children of war were building a better tomorrow. It was not a perfect universe, and it never would be, but it was a universe where mercy was possible, where compassion could triumph over hatred, where one heart shared between strangers could change the course of history. Elias Vance smiled and looked up at the night sky, remembering all those he had lost and all those he had saved. And somewhere among those distant lights, Maya smiled back.